Now, as part of our Women's Month coverage, tonight we're exploring how women are doing in the workplace. Is the pay gap getting wider or smaller? Are workplaces creating a culture that allow women to succeed in leadership roles? How far have we come? To discuss, we're joined by Bronwyn Williams from Flux Trends, Natasha Moni from Moni Attorneys Incorporated, and Busisiwe Mavuso from Business Leadership South Africa. Good evening to you all. And my first question is to all of you. Where are women in the workplace? Let's just start there. How friendly do you believe workplaces are to ambitious women who want to climb the ladder and don't need to be blocked or punished for having children? Let's start with you, Bronwyn.
Well, that would very much depend on the organization and the industry that women find themselves working in. So if we look at gender pay gaps across the marketplace, we can see that some industries have much higher barriers for women who are trying to break through those glass ceilings. So our financial industry, surprisingly enough, actually has quite a low gender pay gap. But then if you compare that to, say, the real estate industry or the healthcare industry or the technology industry, you see these gaps becoming much, much wider. So that really speaks from our perspective to both a cultural thing at an organizational level, and also to the way that girls, particularly young girls, are being encouraged to go into certain types of education, which will set them up for future careers. So hopefully that answers your question somewhat.
A great opening shot. Busisiwe, your take on where women are in the workplace right now?
So you will have seen the Commission of Employment Equity report that was released, was it this week or last week sometime, and unfortunately it paints a very bleak picture. So the female representation in top management is at 24%, when 20 years ago it was sitting at 13%. Very dull picture if you consider the fact that the stats that come out from universities year after year tell us that there is more women entering universities, there is more fast graduating, and corporates themselves will tell you that there is more fast being absorbed into corporate South Africa. So Bronwyn is spot on in terms of saying that there seems to be a glass ceiling that continues to exist, especially in the private sector, in as far as the ascension of women to top leadership positions. And I guess it continues to be a struggle. It's unfortunate that 26 years into democracy, we're still having the same conversation that we had, 26 years ago. And the fact that there's only a 0.6% increase year after year in terms of the number of women that make it to top, management. So if you look at this trend, I think, the verdict is out in terms of how many years exactly is it going to take us as women to occupy the same, or for there to be gender parity in as far as holding these senior roles in corporate South Africa in particular.
Yeah, you're right. The same conversation, we've been having it for years. And Natasha, your take?
Well, I'm fascinated with what Bronwyn said about the financial institutions narrowing the gap. But what is not happening is that we are not taking cognizance of the amount of bullying that is going on within those institutions in particular. Now, we've made tremendous strides, like Busisiwe said, but we are very, very far from gender equality. And I'd like to see it as, women don't go up a career ladder. They actually really do sort of go up a jungle gym, and they have to maneuver and pivot and change the way they do it at certain times of their lives. Men don't get to do that. And women also have the sensitivities that women don't have. And that seems to be used against us. Also, the inherent bias by a woman against other women is sitting still at 40%, and we haven't addressed that at all. And I see you, Bronwyn, because it's true. We have come a tremendous way, but still 30% of those women who are experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace are the ones who complain. And when they complain, terrible things happen to them because it's institutionalized and it's systemic. I'm hopeful, but that's all I am.
So let me stay with you, Natasha. You spoke about bullying, and of course sexual harassment is something that specifically affects women in the workplace. So you often deal with legal fallouts. Is the journey, like you're saying, very different for women climbing up the corporate ladder, and how so?
Well, women have children. Women have families, and women still have to look after those families. And what happens is that you take a fair portion out of your working life to look after your family. Women still are the if I can use that word, for making sure that your children are safe, secure, healthy, and that they're getting a good education. Very, very seldom do you find a man who also works being able to do the same amount of work 24/7 that a woman does. Women are not, and because of this, women are not as ambitious as you would expect a woman to. If a woman tells you that, you know what, she'd like to stay in her position for the rest of her life, because not because she's not ambitious, but because she is looking after everybody else in her family. It's very, very strange for a woman to come out there and say, I want to be the next judge president of the Constitutional Court or of the courts of South Africa. If you find a woman doing that, she might not have a family, and she might not be married, and her career is the only thing that she's looking out for. So it's this disproportion that I'm finding, especially in law. Law is known as a very aggressive industry. You have to be the mean pit bull. And I'm finding more and more as I get older that that's not the case. And I had this conversation with a client of mine today. I find that younger women don't understand that they need to mentor, coach, guide the older women and those people coming up the ladder or the jungle gym. I find as you get older, it's your natural fallback position to start mentoring and coaching and guiding. One last thing, Francis, what I have discovered during COVID is those young women that are coming up the chains and hitting the ceilings do not have the natural enablers that are there for them, because everything is virtual at the moment.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk to Bronwyn about the trends, because women are so busy at home. But first, let me start with you, Busisiwe. You are a prominent woman in business, and we're talking about culture now. And obviously, so Natasha is touching on the fact that women have to sacrifice a lot more usually, and they're seen in a different way. What about those soft things? I mean, it used to be said that a lot of deals were done on the golf course. That men had more time to go for drinks after work, and deals were being done. There were efforts to ensure that women were included where they were previously excluded. Talk about that. Have we achieved anything there?
Unfortunately not much, and I think Natasha is actually spot on, because I think the culture within corporate South Africa still remains very much patriarchal. So you go into corporate South Africa as a woman knowing very well that for me to achieve the same recognition, I'm actually going to have to work twice as hard. You go in knowing very well that I'm actually going to be swimming against the tide. You know very well that I'm getting into an environment, where, number one, I'm going to be in the minority, and where most of those that I'm going to be sitting around the table with don't speak my language. And until we can get more women in around the room, occupying these powerful seats, only then are we going to see, conditions for women within corporate South Africa changing. Because being the lone voice, advocating for, some of these positions, and as far as the gender agenda is concerned, you actually don't get very far. So the face of leadership, really continues to be male and white in the South African context. And therefore, it still continues to be a battle. We continue to have conversations, but you see, it seemingly is a conversation that we actually probably maybe put a greater spotlight on during this August month. And I think that is why it never gains enough prominence.
Yeah.
So I think the default position, for corporate South Africa, when looking to appoint an executive, it will always be male. So there normally has to be a business case that is made to say that for this position in particular, we need a woman. So we are never the default position. So I guess those are some of the things. And my view is that the reason why it is so, it's precisely because those that are actually charged with these decisions or that still have the power are those that don't look like us. So for them, it's very easy to bring in those that look like them around the table. Hence, I'm saying that I think this will be made much easier for us when there is more women actually occupying seats around the table so that we can all advocate for the same things and give a strong and powerful voice to the gender agenda.
And I mean, this involves a clear commitment from men in power and even women in power. Natasha was picking up that sometimes they're not committed to helping other women rise up from through the ranks. So this involves a concerted effort, Busisiwe.
It does. So it needs to be intentional, it needs to be deliberate. And I don't understand, 26 years into democracy, why as women would think that it is wise, it is smart, and it is progressive to be the only woman in the room. If anything, it is disempowering, not just to you, but to the broader gender agenda. And if you agree that the numbers are what they are, you therefore, if you don't sit and advocate for the gender agenda, it means that you have literally folded the ladder that you used to come up to the C-suite with as a woman, and you have kept it with you in your office, instead of holding it firm so that other women can actually come up the ladder, and unfortunately, this artificial glass ceiling that exists is precisely because the voice in the C-suite and in the executive positions is not strong enough. So it therefore, makes sense that there needs to be more women for conditions within corporate South Africa in particular to change. And I guess from a male perspective, if you are not going to have a sponsor as a female leader, then unfortunately you're not going to go very far in corporate South Africa. So it seems as if your ascension to leadership is dependent on someone making a decision to say that I'm going to back her up irrespective of. So it's got nothing to do with skills, it's got nothing to do with qualifications. And I think, you look at the gender pay gaps and you say, to what extent does it make sense that for work of equal value, I will be paid less, right? Unless someone, can intentionally intervenes to say that we're actually going to have to ensure that we level the playing field, as it were. But unfortunately, those voices are very few and far in between.
Yeah. So let me ask Bronwyn to come in there, because you said that the pay gap differs among different industries, and it's actually not so bad in finance. Any insight into why that is, Bronwyn?
Well, it comes down to, once again, the individual organizations and their cultures and how they are promoting and investing in those skills. And if there is a skills pipeline. So in some industries, we have a scarcity of females. So if you're talking about something like, say, the IT industry, as much as even corporates and as well as the public sector have put a lot of effort into encouraging young women to get into STEM, to get into coding, there still are less women graduating in those particular fields. So some industries are starting with a bigger challenge that's both systemic and internal, whereas other industries we're finding that we have more equitable sort of pipelines of women coming through the process. Now, what I also find particularly interesting in the sort of disparity between the differences in wage gaps across the sector is how different wage gaps are depending on the size of the company. So we see quite a high correlation that the bigger companies, your big blue chip stock companies, tend to have bigger pay gaps than your small cap stocks. That's just in the listed sector. And as you sort of move down the food chain, you find that the gender pay gap is less advanced at very small businesses. And that's an interesting trend just from a completely macro perspective to look at there.
I'm very surprised, because you think the big companies look at culture, have huge HR departments looking at pay and things like that. Bronwyn, Bronwyn, continue your thought, and I also want to ask you, talking about trends, has this move online during lockdowns around the world, has it helped or hindered women who we know, because of much research, are doing most of the work at home in terms of childcare and domestic work?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually an issue we looked at quite a lot last year. We did quite a big piece of work for that with my company at Flux Trends. And what we found is that in South Africa, women are spending around 2.5 times as much time doing care work in the home as men are in South Africa. This is not an indictment on South African men in particular at all. In fact, South Africa is about mid-pack if you look at the unequal distribution of that unpaid care work in the home compared to global averages. But still, it's quite extraordinary. So the average woman is spending around about 4 hours on unpaid work in the home, care work, that's doing chores, looking after parents, elderly parents, children, doing the school run, all of those sorts of things. And men spend less than 2 hours a day on household chores. Sure, yeah. So that does tend to add up.
All right, thank you for that. We're running out of time. Natasha, I wanted to bring up an issue with you. Sometimes it's said that women hold themselves back. There's research that suggests that women don't go and push for higher pay. Sometimes they should. It's the men who actually go and ask for those bigger paychecks. You look at the legal issues. Do you believe that women are getting better at fighting for their rights, fighting for the right pay, fighting for the right positions in the workplace?
I certainly think that women know how to negotiate. And I certainly think women are much wiser. But can I give all our women a tip? When you're going for a job and they say, please can we have sight of your last salary pay slip, don't show them. Ask them, why is it necessary for you to see what I was paid? Surely you should pay me commensurate with what you expect me to do, and on that basis, I will accept a job, and not on the basis of just putting an extra 10 or 20% on my salary slip. So what I'm trying to say is, and it always seems so bizarre when I tell women this, but men seem to accept it completely when I mentor them. Fake it until you make it. You know, you've earned your right to sit at the table, but you're coming back from the table too early. You're forecasting your wedding, and you're forecasting the first year that you're going to have your child, but you've already left the table. Stay there, stick in, and make your mark, because in 3 or 4 months, when you come back to the table, you still want to be resoundingly welcomed, as opposed to begrudgingly finding you a position and a slot because you've been replaced.
All right, very quickly, I can throw in one final question to Busisiwe. What do you think this whole debate about women holding themselves back? Should they be more brazen? We know that women sometimes suffer more from that imposter syndrome. What's your advice as well?
You know, I precisely was going to go there to say that I think a lot of us as women suffer from the imposter syndrome, right? And I think probably maybe it is exacerbated by the fact that we find ourselves in an environment that has got a lot of double standards. So you find yourself as a woman in corporate South Africa where you are damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you speak, you know, you'll either be told you speak too much or you don't speak enough. You know, you either are too aggressive or you fail to assert yourself. You either smile all the time or you're always frowning. And those things never come up, you know, when it comes to men. So I think it sort of like gives us missteps in terms of exactly how am I supposed to, you know, assert myself as a leader, as it were. And precisely because there are very few examples for us to look up to, you know, it therefore becomes that challenge, you know, because let's agree that we live in conflicting environments as a woman, where when you have to leave the office, you take off that hat and you have to go home and be a mother and sort of like have to adjust. And when you have to come back, so I think the leadership thing still continues to trip us up. You know, a lot of us don't take to leadership with the same energy and gusto. You know, we need to understand that when you get to a leadership position, you know, you don't have to ask for affirmation to lead. You don't have to, you know, ask for permission to do what you have to do, and also understand that the rules of the game are not going to change because there is a leader, a woman CEO in power. You actually have to do what you need to do. Don't try and please everyone. Because if you try to please everyone, you are not going to achieve the results that you need.
Well, thank you all for this incredible discussion tonight. That was Bronwyn Williams from Flux Trends, Natasha Moni from Moni Attorneys Incorporated, and Busisiwe Mavuso from Business Leadership South Africa. And yes, hopefully we're not having the same discussion year after year. Next year, let's talk about some progress.